Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's always good to see so many people supporting a subject like this, particularly, first of all, when it's, let's be honest, this is not the central thrust of this conference. So all of the speakers have agreed to include some element of fraud and corruption in their presentations, so that you feel that you can feel connected, and also particularly congratulations after last night. Jens and I have a kind of ongoing bantering competition. I think he won it when he gave our seminar first thing in the morning after the conference dinner. So, but we're here, so well done. That's 1-0 for me against Jens. The presentation, as you can see, is about physical activity in Europe. The context is a programme that's funded by the European Union Erasmus Mundus project, Erasmus Mundus funding, called PASS, Physical Activity Serving Society, which is a collaborative venture between a number of organisations, some of whom are represented today. So, for example, you can see there's the International Sport and Culture Association, the European Physical Education Association, the International Council of Sports Science and Physical Education. Other organisations include the European Sporting Goods Association, the Association for International Sport for All, and Sports and Citizenship. Have I missed one? If they're not here, it doesn't matter, does it? So this is an international project trying to develop evidence-based guidance for member states within the European Union. As you will know, physical activity is not just an issue for the European Union, but it is something that increasingly the European community is recognising as an issue of some importance. The talks that we'll be hearing today are some of the presentations are about physical activity in general, some are about the context in the European Union, some are about specific settings like the school, or if it's here later on, the workplace. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody, something that will be perceived as relevant for everyone. Because one of the things about, I suppose we could argue that corruption is a particular aspect of sport, whereas physical activity is a human universal. All humans engage in physical activity as a matter of survival. I mean, this is almost certainly the case throughout the whole history of human evolution, that physical inactivity would be associated with an early death. The recent physical activity campaign, Designed to Move, that was funded by or supported by a very large number of organisations, was premised on the simple principle that every human being is meant to be physically active, and there's things about our environment, our social environment, our physical environment, that restrict that activity, and then human bodies are paying the consequences of that. Human minds are paying the consequences of it, and social groups are paying the consequences. So I'd just like to introduce some of the speakers today who will be talking about some of these issues. First, going this way down the line, first up is Marvin Radford from the International Sport and Culture Association, that is fortuitously based in Denmark. Then we have Maja Pilgaard from the Danish Institute for Sport Studies, Martin Holzweg from the European Physical Education Association, Rosemary Repond from Bern University of Applied Sciences, the Federal Institute of Sport, Magglingen, and there will be a prize at the end if anyone can say the word Magglingen correctly, and Rosemary will be the judge. I've been there maybe 12 times and I still can't pronounce it correctly. And then I'm a senior researcher at the International Council of Sports Science and Physical Education, and this seminar is being hosted, if you like, by ICSSPE, which is the largest member organisation for sport in the world. So the idea is I'm going to make a few points about the context, and then our speakers will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes to make their presentations, and then we'll have a decent opportunity for questions and discussion. So first things first, if I... Sorry? Does that work? No. That doesn't work either. Something's happening. In Germany, I'm based in Berlin now, there's an advertisement for, I can't remember the product, it's Vorsprung durch Technik, progress through technology. I don't know whether that's appropriate now. Right. Myself and 3 colleagues in the United States published the most comprehensive review ever undertaken of the benefits of physical activity for individuals and social groups. It's called the Human Capital Model. The idea of the Human Capital Model is that physical activity and sports are investments in positive outcomes throughout life, both whilst you do the activity and later on. So I'll give you a few concrete examples. All of this is freely available on the web, but a few concrete examples. Children who are members of sports clubs in adolescence are more likely to go to university, are less likely to engage in risky sexual behaviour, less likely to take drugs, and children who are physically active, particularly with anaerobic activity, will perform higher than those on average who do not engage in anaerobic activity. There's a whole host of outcomes to do with physical development, emotional development, and so on, associated with physical activity. And we're reaching a point now where the evidence in favour of physical activity as a contributor to health and well-being needs to be rethought, because the classic association is with physical health, so coronary heart disease and arteriosclerosis and so on. What's becoming clear, and as presented by the Human Capital Model, is that really what we're talking about with physical activity is effective human functioning. In other words, the physically active individual has a more efficient system, has a more efficient general functioning, and physical health is one aspect of it, but there are a whole host of other aspects of it. The other thing that comes clear in the Human Capital Model is that these outcomes do not occur automatically, and anyone who has experienced a bad sports coaching session or has witnessed a bad physical education session will know that it's simply not true that self-esteem develops necessarily as a consequence of physical activity. Negative sporting experiences can damage self-esteem, social groups, social inclusion as much as anything else, much as in the bank advertisements around the world, interest rates can go up as well as down. The investment for human capital for physical activity, when presented badly or negatively or inappropriately, can actually harm human capital, which to me suggests the vital importance of teachers and coaches and parents, rather than facilities, which would seem to be important but of secondary importance. If you look at activity according to the physical activity, according to the recent review in the Lancet Medical Journal, what we're finding is this is the percentage of people according to their meta-analysis who fail to meet the minimum requirements of daily physical activity set out by the World Health Organization, ranging from Africa, where basically 1 in 4 fail to meet the minimum requirements, to Eastern Mediterranean, where nearly half fail to meet the minimum requirements. Now, what that means in practice is, if you, according to the World Health Organization, if you fail to meet those levels of activity, you will not be gaining the health benefits associated with it. We have the Eurobarometer, which is another mechanism for assessing activity levels, and this is sports participation levels. The question was, how often do you exercise or play sports? Bulgaria, I don't know if we have anyone from Bulgaria here, 80% answered never. I never play sport or exercise. Malta, Portugal, Romania, Italy, Greece. In fact, there's a whole host of countries, Poland, Cyprus, Greece and so on, for whom the majority of people never exercise or play sport. Okay, there's more to life than sports and exercise, possibly. Thank you. No? Oh, there we go. So, okay, so forget sports and exercise, there's other ways of being fit, or other ways of keeping healthy. So then the question is, how often do you engage in other forms of physical activity? Here we go again. Portugal, Malta, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Italy, Greece. Never. So the reason I'm mentioning this is some people question the concept of a physical inactivity epidemic and say scaremongering, it's just the medical profession trying to engender a sense of fear to control people's lives. It seems to me that the pattern of physical activity over the last 50 years is alarming. It's cause for concern and requires serious attention. The other issue, of course, is gender. Every survey ever carried out, apart from one, as far as I can see, has reported that girls are significantly less active than boys. Now, we could explain that by some pseudoscientific genetic explanation, or by the fact that there's something about the social environment and upbringing that is influencing that behaviour. And by age, as people get older, they obviously get less physically active, to the point where the majority of people aged over 55 do no physical activity at all. The evidence is fairly clear that shortens the lifespan. Physical activity is not just about improving the quality of life, it improves the quantity of life. If you're inactive during early childhood, evidence suggests it can reduce your life expectancy by up to 5 years. What that means is that the generation that are of children that are growing up now are potentially the first generation in recorded history to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. Yeah.
Is that an average on all European countries?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. If you go to Eurobarometer, it does it country by country, then this is the average score. Yeah. So, my intellectual mentor was a guy called Karl Popper, an Austrian philosopher, and he used to say, to what problem is this solution? Don't just give people solutions unless we're clear what the problem is. I wanted to spend a little while explaining what the problem was. The problem is that the human body has evolved over generations to be physically active, and the current environment in which we live seems to be working against that evolved need. So that's the problem. What are the solutions? Some of the speakers here today will be talking about potential solutions, potential ideas. We'll have opportunity to hear your ideas as well during the discussion. But for now, I'd ask you to hand over to the first speaker, who is Marvin. Cool.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning. I would like to present for you some information, but also in the context of the information portal. It's called the Physical Inactivity Time Bomb. So as opposed to preparing a PowerPoint, I'm going to use some of our resources that ISCA has. I'm from the International Sport and Culture Association. I'm going to refer to some resources that we have online, and that also makes it easy for you to see where's the information coming from and how might you also gain access to it. Suddenly, when that went in, my internet went out. So maybe if we leave it out. Yeah, I don't need it. Thanks. Yeah, okay. Well, that was technology. What did you call it? Thank you. Do you have internet on this one? Yeah, that's really all I need. Here we are. So the Inactivity Time Bomb. This is a project that ISCA commissioned, and it was launched in June of this year, of 2015 in Brussels. And what I'd like to do is take you through a couple of features of this report. And I think it was important in the introduction that Richard referred to the human capital model. And he drew some distinctions, particularly related to children, but he drew some distinctions between the physical development and emotional development. And I think when you hear a phrase like effective human development, from my perspective, I typically work on the fundraising side and project development side. It's always interesting to find and discover new arguments that strengthen the proposals that you're putting together, the projects that you want to see come in the future. So to simply say sport and physical activity is good for us isn't really good enough. And sometimes we need a bit more information that grabs some attention, that strengthens the position of what we're proposing. And I think when we say effective human function, we could ask ourselves, what is the cost of ineffective human function? Or human ineffectiveness, physical ineffectiveness, or the cost of physical inactivity. And this is a bit of what we looked at. And I want to take you through, you can see this is the main page of the Inactivity Time Bomb website. I'm going to quickly take you through the infographic, and then we're going to conclude with a 2-minute summary video. And then following the video, I can also direct you to the press portal that's been put together for this report as well. The lack of exercise, a huge health threat, and it's costing Europe billions each year. When you think about our organization, ISCA, our organizations collectively are asking for very little. Collectively, we're asking for millions. But the cost of not doing the work we're proposing is costing billions. That within itself I find quite interesting. The problem, as Richard has also alluded to, Europe's not moving. 1 in 4 adults and 4 in 5 adolescents across Europe are not active enough. And what is active enough? Adults advised to take part in 150 minutes of activity each week. Adolescents, 60 minutes per day. Inactivity kills, and we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. Why would we say that? Have a look. Deaths caused in Europe every year by not moving enough. 500,000. 500,000 people. 1 in 10 deaths in Europe are attributed to physical inactivity. If we do nothing, the lack of exercise could soon cause more deaths than smoking. But the burden isn't shared equally, and some countries are more inactive than others. Consider, if you will, what have we done to combat smoking? Laws, policies, laws, taxes. We've attacked it from multiple angles. And we've campaigned and campaigned and campaigned. 25 plus years of campaigning. The most effective campaigning in the anti-smoking era has been in the last 10 years. When the campaign funders, primarily public institutions, realized that they're most effective when campaigning together, collaboratively, with civil society organizations. A campaign within itself is not good enough, but a campaign being implemented and combined with the actions on the ground with civil society organizations, that's where we began to see enormous strides in changing human behavior. I find it very interesting, and it's something I think we can learn from when we consider how to tackle the problem of physical inactivity. The percent in Europe, the percent of adult population who are inactive, you can see the average in the middle, it's 26%. Inactive according to the minimum standards. And this is different than the question asked in the Eurobarometer, where you have actually a much higher percentage of inactivity reported. This particular study looked at 5 countries in detail. Those countries were Poland, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and the UK. The nice thing about this website is what you see here is also available in those national languages. So there are portals made relevant for those focus countries as well. Here you can see the average percentage of deaths that are attributed to inactivity. This is interesting when you look at it by country. Almost 17% of the deaths in the UK are attributed to physical inactivity. Is death a cost? Sure. How do we measure it? Maybe we don't want to. But we can measure money. What does it cost? Physical inactivity. The lack of exercise it contributes to diseases that are costing Europe 80 billion euros each year. Have a look at this. Breast cancer, colorectal cancer, type 2 diabetes, mood and anxiety disorders, and coronary heart disease. What's a little bit different about this report is that it includes mood and anxiety disorders. Richard mentioned earlier in the human capital model, you have emotional development. And when you don't have that, it also comes at a cost. So I think it's quite interesting that there is this attempt to make a link with the emotional as well as the physical cost to physical inactivity. 80.4 billion euro. That's more than the global spending on cancer drugs. And the 80 billion is in Europe alone. That's more than the Spanish healthcare budget. And it's more than overseas development aid from EU countries. The solution? Simple. Move more. Exercise and sport, great for health, but moving more is what matters most. Walking your dog, taking a run on 2 wheels, using the stairs instead of elevator, playing. Play is fantastic. 20 minutes a day, it would help a lot. The medicine is inherently free and available to everyone. I brought some medicine with me. It's a movement pill box. It's fantastic, and it's loaded. And you know, when you open it, you can come have a look, and we have more of these if you're interested in having some. When you open it, you've got these pills. And what's on the pills? Physical activity. It comes. Self-contained user guide. Doesn't get any better than that. And it's free. And we have examples where these are being handed out as prescriptions. Let's get mobilized. If only 1 of 5 inactive people took up exercise, it would save lives. We would avert 100,000 deaths each year, or at least there would be fewer deaths attributed to physical inactivity. We would save money. We would save minds. And we would also have success with our campaign called Now We Move, looking to mobilize 100 million more Europeans in sport and physical activity by 2020. This report was developed to give us some content, some advocacy content at the ISCA Secretariat, as well as enabling our members to advocate for what they do and to do what they do more effectively in their advocacy work. This is a project of ISCA, as I've said before, and here you can see the supporters and contributors. It's a number of different types of organizations, public, private, NGOs, and you can see more at the website as suggested. I'll conclude with a 2-minute video that perhaps summarizes better than I could do myself. The question is, will we have sound through the house, or if we don't, then I need to summarize myself. Should we try? Sorry?
I think you need an audio cable.
Longer and help.
Excellent. I prepared for the job I had today. My first student job at university was as a technical assistant in situations like this.
What if you could take a pill to help you live a longer and healthier life, and even lift your mood? The thing is, you could be taking this medicine right now, because the medicine is exercise. As humans, we need to move around for a healthy body and a healthy mind. But across Europe, many of us are not moving as much as we should. 1/4 of European adults are not active enough, and a staggering 4 out of every 5 teenagers. Incredibly, diseases relating to this inactivity cost over 80 billion euros every year. That's more than we spend on cancer drugs in a year in the entire world. But more importantly,
So we lost that internet again. This video is available. You're very welcome to go when you have a better connection. Have a look. I'll leave you with the view from the website where you can click, and it says press. So up in the top right corner. And on this particular site, you can see the various press releases that have been prepared. You have the infographics included, you have some good talking points, you have some good information, also country specific. So when you see a press release in a language, you will also find data that's specific or relevant for those countries, which can be interesting for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, after yesterday, I didn't think that this conference could get more depressing, but I was wrong. But yet we have some solutions, and now we're going to talk about teenagers, teenage girls, and I refuse to end up with a solution that these teenage girls should take a pill to become more physically active. I think there are other things that we can do. I'm going to talk about teenage girls, but please don't get me wrong. Many of my points today could easily work for teenage boys as well, or for any other age groups. The points are, in general, to create some opportunities that are suitable for a broader audience of people who wants to participate in sport and physical activity. And at this conference so far we've heard a lot about FIFA, and also that FIFA is interested in a lot of people participating in sport in a traditional understanding of a pyramid structure. And I think that even though we have many teenagers, many people, youngsters, adults, I guess we're disturbed here by some drilling. Anyway, my point is that a lot of the sports taking place among these teenagers, even soccer, a lot of times doesn't even have anything to do. And this is a statement, it does have nothing to do, or at least very little to do with what's going on FIFA. A lot of the children that are playing soccer may not even be interested in watching soccer on TV, they're interested in participating. The points today is from a study that I've done together with colleagues at the University of Southern Denmark, led by a professor called Bjarne Ibsen. And the study is collecting some learnings from international research on teenage girls. And then we have some specific data from the case of Denmark to kind of point out the issues that we're talking about. And then I'm going to end with some possible solutions. There's a lot of literature about teenagers and teenage girls and dropout of sport. It seems to be a general field of interest in many different areas. Especially sports organizations are interested in this dropout trend and how we can keep teenagers continuing participating in sport. In an overall perspective, actually, you could see it as a sign of health that teenagers don't continue in the same thing from when they start till throughout the whole life. Dropping out is actually a sign of health, because everyday life is changing over time, and so are interests. And so the issue is not so much keeping the teenagers, the issue is to open or letting down the barriers so it's easy for these teenagers to start when they transfer into new activities, when they get new interests. The learnings, no matter if we look at literature looking at Eastern nations or Western countries, we see the same message. Boys, men are more involved in sport than girls and women. With very little excusing, this is the overall trend. So you could actually ask whether this is a cultural phenomenon when we see it all over the place, or is there something natural going on to the fact that boys are more involved than women? I claim that it is a cultural issue that we can definitely do something about. In many countries, the differences seems to diminish over time. We see more rapid growth, especially among adult women, and especially in this case of health. There are a lot of women starting to take up different kinds of activities. It's also, in a lot of the literature, it's linked to this development of women participating in sport more and more. Is linked to modernizational processes, saying that we, in general, we see a growth in equality in other phases of life, which is also applicable for the tendency to participate in sport. This is also the case of Denmark. We can see a growth in both men and women, and we can see that to some point it seems like even, this is adult women ages 16 and over, even seem to be slightly more active than men these days. This is the case of Denmark, of course, and in an international perspective, it looks slightly different. This is Norway, where we see simply the same tendency as in Denmark. This is a different measure so that's why the percentages are much lower, because here they're measuring the amount who are living up to some American definition of being enough physically active during a week. In an international perspective, this is a fact sheet from an international study that was done comparing these European countries. We can see that in an EU level, all the green and the yellow one is the nations where we have under 5% gender gap in monthly participation. And then we have some nations included in this study where we see also that, especially in the southern countries of Spain and Italy, but also in England and Northern Ireland, a huge gender difference still. The gender difference seems to be even larger when we look at the participation in sports clubs, which is a major point that I will come back to later. From a Danish perspective, we saw that men and women, now it's adults, and also among children, when we look at it from an overall perspective, there's no real gender differences. So what's the problem? When we take a closer look and spread it out on age and gender at the same time, this is where data becomes very strong, and the numbers are speaking for themselves, and they're very powerful in the sense of here we can see very clearly where there's some issues, especially among 16 to 19-year-old women who are actually less active in participating in sport than 70-year-olds. And these numbers show the amount of people who consider themselves as part of a sport and exercise culture. It's people who say, yes, I do participate in sport. So we do not know what kinds of sports, how physically active they actually are in real life. When we look at it over time, there's a trend to see, we can see that from 1975 and up until 2011, there's been an increase each time we measure the amount of people who consider themselves part of a sport and exercise culture. And again, Denmark might be a little bit of a special case here, because in 2011, the grade, we hardly see any difference in age. But there's one thing that shows here a different development, and that is, again, among the teenagers, they're actually becoming less and less active over time. So the most active teenage group was from 1993, and each time we've measured, they become less active. So why is this? One of the reasons is that they don't say that they don't participate in sport, but they answer the middle option, which is called yes, but not at the moment. They actually say that they are taking a break. So do we have a problem here? Maybe not. But it's interesting. Why is it that they feel like they have to put participation on hold at this particular time? Maybe it makes great sense, because if we look at other phases of everyday life, in this life phase, there's a lot of stuff going on. Especially the participation is dropping out of club sport. And once again, it's not only among women, it's also among men that we see that during the teenage years, there's a massive dropout of club sport. A lot of those friends that stay in these clubs, they tend to participate even more. They spend more and more time focusing on the general agendas of participating in a sport club, becoming better, becoming more professionalized, participating in tournaments, participating in games every weekend for a long season, and so on. Not all of these that are dropping out completely stop. There are also some that actually take up activities in different settings. And here we can see the private commercial sector actually gaining members during these same years where they drop out of sport clubs. And here we see more women than men. So in one sense you could ask if it's fair that the girls and the women have to pay for their own participation in a commercial center, where most of the public funding goes to the sport clubs. Some possible explanations very shortly here for the things that are happening with these teenagers. In 3 overall subtitles of some background issues with these teenagers: age, gender, cultural background. With the issues that we see with teenage girls are just getting even more clear when we look at girls with an ethnic background from a non-Western country. Due to cultural issues or traditions of girls not seen as participating in sport, lots of practical issues with discriminating or making sure that there's only women in the rooms, and so on and so forth. There's also some issues about possibilities. There's not much in the studies that we found that shows that the competition from other offers are actually the issue here. A lot of times it's not so that these teenage girls start being interested in other things. On the other hand, it's most likely so that if you're active in other activities, in music or theater and so on, you're also more active in sport. But some of the interesting places, I think, is to look at the organized sport offers, and in order to make some offers that are more available for teenagers who maybe just wants to play soccer or practice any other activity as part of it being social, as part of being physically active, as part of daily movement and daily having a fun activity that is not necessarily going for run by a structure of participating in a tournament and winning medals. There's very little also in in the literature that shows that the availability of facilities are a barrier for these teenagers to participate in sport, at least when you ask themselves. This very rarely that they say they lack a certain kind of facility. But nevertheless, it's interesting to consider what kind of facilities that are being built and what kinds of activities that those facilities are meant for, and how that is transferred into activities that are interesting for both women and men. A third area is experiences. In order to explain this, we see that girls they're less excited about sport going on in school than boys. So there's some experiences already from what's happening in school that maybe turning girls away from interest in participating in sport. There's something about coach experiences, and especially the role of the social, which is one of the most interesting things, I think. But there's a lot of teenage girls who say they lack somebody to follow them or to be able to be in a social context, and that is why they drop out of sport. So that is more important than anything else. I don't think I have too much more time, but I can end up saying, do we have a problem here? The teenage girls are just having a break, and we can see that later in life, especially for the case of Denmark, they seem to come back. And then maybe we have an issue with older or grown-up men's, but that's a different topic.
That's for another day.
It's for another day, yeah. But in the sense of talking about creating offers that can fit these teenagers who are actually willing to participate in the sport in a different way than the agenda of the sport club, I do think that we have an issue that we can address and that we can actually do something about. Address this with the males primarily in sport clubs, females primarily in the private sector. Also, the facilities could be an issue, and in general there's a need for increased diversity in the supplies, and that is the main thing that I wanted to address. Thank you.
Yes, hello, good morning. Sorry? No, it's fine. It's a pleasure to speak here in Denmark. It's the first time for me that I participated at a conference in Denmark, although as I was living in Kiel and Flensburg, which is close to the Danish border, we almost passed every weekend from Germany through Denmark to the Danish coast to enjoy the nice beaches and the surfing here at the Denmark coast, because it's not sheltered from the British island or from Great Britain, and gets much better conditions than Germany. So, but now we are on the east coast, no waves. I will report on, or give you a short presentation on changing the school. So the title might suggest that I strongly propose that there's a need to change and to improve, but I'm rather conservative and say, okay, there might be a need to change, but if we decide to change something, it should be based on empirical evidence. It should not just be a feeling or that we need to change or we need to improve because there's a need to change. Let me give you an overview. First I will talk about physical education, school sport and physical activity. Then change and quality. Then school autonomy. Then physical activity and self-concept. Then physical activity and academic achievement. Then I will focus on primary school education, and in the end I give you a short conclusion and try to give a summary. I think it's very important that we differentiate between the terms school sport, physical education, physical activity. So in my mind, usually when you have a look at literature, sometimes it's not clear what we are really talking of. And right in the beginning, it helps us when we have clear definitions that everybody knows, okay, what are we talking of? Are we talking of school sport, like all sport activities that happen in the framework of the school? Or are we talking of physical education, which we understand is a subject, is taught by physical education teachers, females or males that studied sport at a university, finished with a bachelor degree or even better with a master degree, that are really qualified to teach quality physical education as a school subject? Or are we talking about physical activity, which you can understand in the school context as all physical activities that do not happen only in the curricular setting, but also in the extracurricular activities? They can even happen in the school breaks, they can happen on the way to school, the way back from school to your home. So I think we benefit when we have clear definitions, and also in the articles. A colleague of mine once suggested, just in an article, he's from neuroscience, but we criticized that in those neuroscience articles sometimes they propose they should exercise, they should train, or they should be physically active, but in the end sometimes we do not know what they are talking of because there are no clear definitions. And change in quality. As I mentioned before, you might think this is neoliberal. If you stop going forwards, you start going backwards. What do we see in practice? Are we really aiming at the best quality, or sometimes there's the feeling there's also a financial aspect? Are we looking at a solution that is maybe the cheapest, but probably not with the best quality? What we can clearly see with regard to quality aspects in education system, including also physical education, is that there has been a paradigm shift. Namely, probably what we all experienced in our school career was that educational scientists focused on input. There were a lot of discussions on curriculum, what should be in the curriculum, what should be the content, what should be the aim, and so on and so on. But starting with TIMSS or these international studies like PISA, there was a different trend. From input orientation on the one hand to output orientation or outcome orientation, which we are focusing right now. And for me this makes sense, because there can be a lot of input, but when we do not reach the pupils or the students, we are not effective. So no matter how good the curriculum is, when we do not succeed in transferring it to the knowledge of the students or the pupils, we are not successful. So from my point of view, this does make sense to have an outcome orientation, and I would not regard this as neoliberal and say, okay, only the outcome counts. Of course we should think of the content of the curriculum, we should think of the aims that we want to achieve in physical education or in school sport or with physical activity in schools. But in the end we have to prove that we really achieve what we are targeting at. And there are some guidelines for policymakers. The UNESCO guidelines, I think it's a very good idea to publish those guidelines for the policymakers. But in the end, of course, also these guidelines we have to double check whether it is based on empirical evidence. And so my proposal would be that while making decisions, or while making politic decisions, we should stick to evidence-based or to an evidence base that we have from research studies. And I like very much the approach from a European funded project, 5-year project, like Aro and colleagues conducted in the last years, called Repond. research into policy to enhance physical activity. This is exactly what I mean with evidence-based. So that we are not thinking, oh, this is a good policy because we have the feeling it might be good, but we clearly stick to research studies that prove that some certain interventions are effective, others are not. And then, of course, we should not only focus on single studies, we should try to have meta-analysis or summarizing single studies, because an advantage might be that we look in different countries or even different regions, and I'm glad to see many regions represented here in the room. We might learn, for example, from our colleague from Canada. We might also learn from our colleague in Australia. They have good examples, they have single studies. But of course the question for us here in Europe, or for me in Germany, is can we transfer the findings from Canada, from Toronto for example, can we transfer the findings from Australia to our culture, our countries, to our setting? This was the background, and I want to give you 3 examples. The first one is school autonomy, or describing who's responsible for the school program. So first, our idea, we conducted this study with EUPEA, which is the umbrella organization of all national European physical education teacher associations. And our feeling was, what we learned from some studies, it is good when you have local networks, right? When schools connect to sport clubs, to the community, to the public sport authorities. This would give a certain autonomy to the school, and probably this might be successful. When you have a look at Denmark, for example, in Greenland, it might be different than on the main, than in Denmark here. But the question was, does it really guarantee, when you give more autonomy to the school with regard to the school program, that it is effective? And we expected it would be effective, but our data said something else. Namely, when the school program is on national level, or the responsible for the school program, so it's centralized, and you can see quite clearly in primary school that the amount of hours per week is higher than when it's on school level. This is also true for the middle school, but not so clear for the high school. So what might be an explanation for that? That the school principals, when it comes to cut certain hours, they are more likely to cut PE lessons than other lessons. But when you have a national curriculum where it says, okay, 3 hours per week, or some countries ask for daily PE lessons, although I'm also skeptical with that, with our German background 80 years ago, we had daily school physical education, and still I'm very ashamed when I drive to the Danish coast that I still see the bunkers on the beaches. So only 5 hours says nothing. It says maybe a little bit, but in the end it says nothing about quality, it's only quantity. And what you learn in these 5 hours, that's up to the teachers. Physical activity and self-concept. Also my colleague Richard mentioned it before. From my point of view, it is not clear that certain things in physical education or in the school context just happen by chance. Only by practicing physical activity, or only because physical education happens 3 times a week, does not guarantee that the self-concept improves. And sometimes it's our Bern colleague from Switzerland showed, only aiming at increasing, for example, the self-concept, be more confident, trust in yourself, or what you can learn in physical education or by practicing physical activities, is sometimes not what we are aiming at from a pedagogical perspective. Because usually what you find is that boys are more likely to overestimate their skills, overestimate their abilities, whereas girls sometimes tend to be a little more shy or to underestimate their skills. And then when your general idea is, with physical activity, with physical education, I can improve it, then this is sometimes not true for the boys that overestimate their skills. It would be better, and this is a recommendation what my colleague from Switzerland says. They have a term, I'm not sure if it really exists in English, verticality. In Swiss German it would be Vertikalität, which means our aim should be that the students or the pupil in the end should have a more realistic estimate of their physical skills. So sometimes it's even better not to increase the self-concept, it's even better to reduce it a little bit, that they are more the estimation of their motor skills is more appropriate. For some it might be better to increase it, but generally saying, oh, increasing is our major aim, in this case, for example, when it comes to physical self-concept, is not true. Physical activity and academic achievement. So my colleague Budde and his research group from Brazil, they did several animal experiments, and also in the school context they tested what effects physical activity has on children. And many other studies propose that physical activity can have a positive effect on academic achievement. But also here, it is usually it is interesting what kind of academic achievement are you aiming at. For example, I was teaching 2 years in a German secondary school, mathematics and physical education, and I could notice when people, when the students came from physical education lessons, and the activity level was very high, like or some very exciting games. And afterwards I was teaching them directly after 5 minutes break in a mathematics class. It was horrible. So the academic achievement was not only better just because we exercised or we did some physical activities or physical education. So also here my suggestion would be we have to define very clearly what do we understand of physical activity. Is it vigorous? Is it moderate? What kind of activity level are we aiming at? And then we can see if the intervention is successful or not. There will be a ICSPE publication quite soon. We are out it. It's the ICSPE Perspectives on Neuroscience, and hopefully Richard and your colleagues will be successful to give a broad overview on neuroscience insight, how physical activity, for example, can serve to improve academic achievement. Okay, I want to come to primary school education. Although I'm not, I have never taught at primary school, I think it is very important that we focus that area, because when it comes to children, this is there in primary school. We still have time to make big improvements, and early positive movement experiences in childhood. That is what many studies suggest. That children who experience these positive classes in physical education, they are more likely to be physically active in their future. Those who did not make positive experiences in early childhood probably will not be that active as the other kids. What we can see here is, because we have a big problem definitely in my country, but also in the European region, and maybe you can give feedback on the data that our British colleagues Ken Hartman and Joe Marshall assessed over the last years or decades. They conducted worldwide surveys on school physical education, and in the primary sector, due to the concept of primary school, that usually you have a general teacher that is responsible for a certain class, you have a problem that sometimes they are not trained to teach physical education, which is usually not the case on the secondary level. And we can take, for example, the European example. Special teachers in a primary school, you only have about 60%, whereas generalist teachers are about 80%. When you have a look on the right column, In secondary school, you see much more specialized teachers that teach physical education. But for example, in my country, about 50% of the German PE teachers in primary school are not qualified to teach PE. They did not study sports at a university. They do not have a bachelor degree, neither a master degree in teaching physical education. They have a pedagogical background, of course, but they are not trained to really teach physical education in school. And that is a problem, because from a motivational aspect, to motivate children, it is difficult. And also from a content point of view, when you're not experienced in teaching, it will be difficult to teach on a high quality level the physical education in primary school. I try to give some conclusion or make a short summary. In the beginning, I think it's important when it comes to research that you clearly define what you're looking at. So have clear definitions, and that's why I usually like in pedagogy the psychological approach, because usually the psychologists are very clear in that. And this does not only relate to definitions of terms, this also relates that you have clear constructs and also have clear theoretical models. So that it is clear in which context you mention physical activity. Do you have a look at it as an independent variable or a dependent variable? It makes a big difference. But when you do not explain your construct, or you do not explain your theoretical model, nobody knows what you are talking of. The aim should, of course, be improvement. Improvement of quality, I think, is the most important thing when it comes to physical activity or physical education in schools. And the changes, the purpose of the change should not be that it is that there has to be change. The purpose has to be that the changes should be based on insight derived from empirical evidence. And as I tried to explain, but what we will probably hear also from Richard when he talks about the human capital model, is that one focus definitely should be, when it comes to school, the beginning of the school period, not the end. Because when the students are almost adults, then it will be probably difficult to change some attitudes or some skills. And it's probably much easier when you start early and then continuously follow the line to improve, or give them a broader motorical foundation. Because this is also one thing that we learned from several studies. When you allow students or pupils to have a broad foundation when it comes to motor competence, then they are much more likely to stay in the sports system. When you specialize them too early, then you have a high rate of dropout. And also from a humanistic point of view, for me it does really make sense when the children themselves decide which sport or which activity they want to participate. And this they can only do if they experience a broad range of physical activity, sport activities. And what I always say is, why is the school sport different, or physical education different than activities in sport clubs? Because in school you reach all children. In the sport clubs you usually have those who are interested anyway. But it makes a difference when you reach everybody. And maybe it's even a bigger success when when a child that was not interested in sport or not interested in physical activity suddenly changes some attitudes and later will be active. So probably it's much more difficult from a pedagogical point of view to succeed in this than reach the students or pupils that are interested anyway. They are members in 3 or 4 sport clubs. And then a 5th sport club, what does it make? Is it really a difference if they join in 4 or 5 sport clubs? Or is it a difference when they join no sport club and then suddenly they play badminton or go swimming? Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, we've reached the time where we're supposed to have a coffee break. So what I was proposing, instead of the new version, is that we begin the next session with your presentation. So So we're going to have a coffee break now, and if you can come back, please be seated. Well, two things. Please do come back. We've got, we have presentations from Rosemary, who will start us off. Michael at the end there talking about workplace, and then I'm concluding, and then there's questions and answers. So please do come back, and please come back at 10:35, ready to go. Thank you very much. Although taking a different angle, I'd say
Oh, yeah. It's just there was an old link.
I did a study to find out the origin of these practices. Spent 18 months. I started around school to do couples. Between the technical authority, really good, brilliant data.
Yeah, I'm Eric. I'm Danish. We are now working on a project about like physical inactivity, and so this is like a great conference for us to be in. And I'm not sure if you can really interview with us. It's just like about would like summarize this on camera. Yeah, would you be able to do it like now, or do you want to do it after?
We're all set this time,
Okay. So,
I think it's absolutely fair. Maybe all
Then this guy came along and helping also being like activities all so there's an email out saying we're doing this. In came Australia, creating new scenes, postulated to first time. So therefore, we now on this piece coming up, and it's all here. So how do we do it? And I'm absolutely aghast. Again, it's the first time ever in the UK. The fact that UK is now it's the first time that the UK is focused on how to take care of it. How is that? That's the business. Exactly. Do you want to come over? Right? It's that's the airport. It's about half an hour. Again, so I didn't know what to expect. So what we looked at is and it's like point that we now we people together from our schools with public housing here to sort of supply who would never. This is something that we look at. So the 18th of February, we're doing a course. I think about women's practice. Then you go to children teachers, they know, unless those people they don't enjoy that's a quite good motivator. And then the whole debate now is the FAA and the two guys got reported in the back. Even if it comes, one guy is 17 and so I'm not conceding, I'm just being come over there. For us, it's very much solely for this like industry and just this idea of men, real men. It's just so team irony, isn't it? I do rugby and boxing. So for me, this thing that man's game anyway, you don't get the kind of chess beating and things because they're tradition. Right. They're not because it was theirs. And there's people saying they're not upset with him because he's wrong decisions. It's the fact he went off the pitch without saying goodbye. He's completely against what he's done. And it's been good.
exactly as we thought it would be. Sorry, stop there and then carry on.
The one presentation you just put on.
Yeah, it's called Poppy at the end. My roots, sorry. Yeah, but I need to send you this PowerPoint version. I've reached an age, you know, I don't know what's going on with one day. It's quite nice sometimes. Sometimes something bad, and I'll just forget. And then life carries on. Oh, okay.
Selvom jeg vil også sige, ryggen er jo lidt
It could be an interesting person.
Nogen der er helt for gang med sig.
Yeah. It's a special place for students. Inside, yeah.
Tak skal du have. Hvad sagde hun, da du kom hjem?
A poster that focuses on facilities. Oh, yeah. Facilities. Okay. Thank you.
Nå, nej, okay, men jeg kommer snart derud og skal snakke med dem, tror jeg. Ja, men tak for det, Morten.
I saw that. Well, I'm actually not sure because, I mean, my thing is about teenage girls in activity. Yeah, that's what my concern is. Well, there should be graduate teachers now. Qualified.
Just check if it works.
Yes. basically, the first one is the cost of activity. The second one is how did you change the situation of people being connected. No, but we're working on two separate stories, right? So, what's that mean? What's the angle? That's the last one. Well, yeah. But I want to put some closer. Because that's no, but Marvin and I want to put them together in the story. I proposed it was the second angle. Well, maybe we can ask those questions next time.
So then you pull any dip.
Yeah, we can just combine.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Ask them more.
Okay, so... Okay, So if only to stop me using whatever little French I have in every conceivable conversation with Rosemary, to stop me doing that now, because even I'm getting frustrated with you. I can't imagine what you must be thinking. Madame, no, I'm doing it again. Okay. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for the speakers this morning. We have well, basically 2 more speakers and then an angry rant at the end, and then we've got time for questions. So, with great pleasure, great pleasure, still doing it. Rosemary Repond from Switzerland will be speaking about health enhancing physical activity.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you also for inviting me in this seminar. I'm also a member in the EUPEA, the European Physical Education Association, so also involving the politics of physical education. I choose to speak about the health and physical activity for different reasons. One reason is that because I had the chance to be an observer in this expert group in Brussels. But the most important thing is that because I believe that we could move something, move people, but move also the politics maybe via those recommendations. So what is Europe doing for this sedentarity? And I think one thing is those recommendations. So that's why I choose this. When I say health, this is really the holistic concept of health, or the WHO definition, which will mean physical, psychological, social, and also emotional health. So just that we know what we are speaking about. Otherwise, I will use the same definition that Martin was speaking about when I speak about physical education, physical activity, or sport in the school. I will stay in the school. This is my field, so this is what I know the best. I was also teaching for the training or the education of the PE teachers at the University in Lausanne and then in Magglingen, Magglingen in French. So I'm very concerned about the physical education. First of all, what are the background? Why are we involved in this subject? And I think the first thing, of course, as we know, this is this sedentarity, the increasing of obesity, but also everybody would agree. When I said everybody, this is the WHO, but many other research also are showing that school seems or should be one of the ideal settings to modify those behaviors. So can we do something? Can we check this, how it works? This is the question that I would like to debate with you. So, knowing that the school-based intervention are worldwide recognized as the place to do something for every people, every child, every young adult as well, as this is an inclusive place. At least in Europe, everybody has the right and the chance to go to school. I will use the review. This review, you see the literature review from 2000 to 2014 to see what has been done until 2014, and then I will take some of the recommendations of the EU and see what we have learned about what we see in the review and how we could do it maybe better to implement those recommendations. When you see the review, there are 2 major things, I would say. One is the intervention which is multi-component. This is mostly the time, the case. Or the second thing is the intervention in physical activity. So the question is, it is better to have a multi-component intervention or a very focused intervention or physical activity. If we take the multi-component intervention, we will have a large spectrum in the intervention, maybe sometimes a bit more diffuse, not as precise as the other one. We will speak about promotion, about recommendation, about stimulation, and the focus will be more on healthy lifestyle than on really the activity, the physical activity and the movement itself. And also, if you see the hundreds of documents that have been published during this time, we can see that it goes, when we speak about multi-component intervention, it goes from 10 minutes every day to 19 minutes 2 times a week, or to a 1 hour physical activity or sport component in every day. So this is quite difficult to analyze exactly what is the good thing, and the outcomes are not always clear. And one thing is sure, that there is a good contribution to education, but if it lasts, if it really makes the people move, or if they know better, if they are really doing it, it's still an open question. If we take the physical activity intervention, so this is more, I would say, more simple, this is very practical, this is really the action. And if we look at the different projects and realizations that have been made during those 15 years, so it's enhancing the moderate to vigorous physical activity, but also doing recreational, pleasant, non-competitive PA, physical activity, so having more people involved, more pleasure also to move, more reason to participate. The second thing is the increasing of physical education program. Sometimes it's the time, but sometimes it's also the intensity of the program. The curricula are changing, so we have in some places even additional lesson, daily activity breaks, and sometimes also daily lesson of physical education. Because this is an increasing in quantity, but as Martin says, we have to look also about the quality of this increased program. The third thing, maybe more surprising for us, this is when we include the feedback. Feedback can be very objective, like pedometers, accelerometer, or even the impedance meter, measuring the different situations. Then those objective information for the children and the adolescents are very interesting. They take care of this, they want to know what is going on, and this is some things that they can really follow up, and they can be responsible for it as well. So for us, maybe one interesting thing to remember, that we need an objective feedback. It's not the only one, of course. The next question is, who is delivering this intervention? So in many situations, this is the teacher, the PE teachers, usually, but also, as we know, in some of I would say in the majority of the primary class, the classroom teacher, sometimes specially trained for it, sometimes not. And here we can say that we need some model, maybe to increase the quality of physical education, teacher or teaching in the primary school. And in the different paper that we could see during this period, we see that we have clearly better results when these interventions are delivered by professionals of physical education. So physical education teacher well trained. Do we have outcomes and assessment of those programs? I took only the 30 trials that they were proposed here. Yes, we have some. If it lasts, this is again a question. The first thing is that we can change the percentage of the body composition, also the BMI, but we know that now there are discussions about the reference of the BMI. But the percentage of the body composition is quite clear. Something is happening when we are doing more physical activity. Then we could see that the PA has been increased. The physical education sometimes, the physical activity in general, and also the sport within the school environment. The tools that have been used are the questionnaire, and again the pedometer and the accelerometer to have the feedback of this increasing in PA. The other assessment, I will not go through, you know them, the fitness test, the motor coordination test, and so on. And more difficult to assess, and the outcomes are not always clear. This is the changes in children's behavior. And the EUPEA made a research about the outcomes, the most important outcomes, learning outcomes of the physical education for the physical education teacher, and the difference between the one who are the most important for the physical education teacher and the one who are the best achieved by the student. And there is a difference, and the difference is very often the difference between the value, I would say, the philosophical values of sport and physical education and the activities. So listening to the children, to the young people, maybe gives us also a good chance to focus on the right activity to involve them in this changement. Then the psychological outcomes also, the enjoyment of PA, the enjoyment of PE as well, of course, but not only the fun, because learning is also enjoyment. So this is also something that we have to think about. So everybody agree that this is important to move more and better. So what is the EU suggesting, the European, for the physical education? So I choose to present some of the EU recommendations on health enhancing physical activity. I'm sure you know those recommendations. They've been published now, so you can find them on the EU website. I just would remember this, that this is the expert group prepared to encourage physical education in schools, including motor skills in early childhood, and to create valuable interaction with the sports sectors, local authority, and the private sectors. And I think it has been accepted by the Commission now. It was the half in 2015. And what we are doing now, what we are working on it, is now the coordination of the implementation of those recommendations. Because otherwise we are exactly where we started. These multi-component things. We have fantastic recommendations, everybody agrees, we know who are the actors, everybody is happy with this, but then what are we doing and how are we doing? I will not read all the recommendations, I just put some here very briefly, well, only for what is concerning the school. So we can see this is the curricula, this is the time allocated, this is the teachers, of course, the assessment, the monitoring, which is a big gap in many places. There are no monitoring, so we can have some idea for this too, the inclusive approach and so on. So we see that there are very clear recommendations concerning the physical education in the school, the physical activity in the school and in the school context, extracurricular activities as well. And, of course, the link with the club, the link with the community, the link with the parents as well. So I choose the recommendations text, that's why I just write the recommendations text. So, from birth and during early childhood. And I think this is for us what is important. This is the physical education should include a broad variety of different games and so on. So it has to be broad enough to interest every people, to give the chance to anyone to learn, to develop, and to enjoy then the activities. And it goes from the birth during the childhood, and we miss sometimes the vocational school, the university students. Of course, we have to start early and to go for it, but we really have to go for it. This is a long run work that we should do for this. The seventh, the physical education and outdoor activities. So I just mark the physical education and extracurricular activities because this is very, I stress this again, but this is important that we use the full spectrum that we have in the school. The physical education, the physical activity outside the curricula, and the sport camp, the sport activities, and so on. So it gives us the break, also the active break. So I think it gives us a chance to have those 16 minutes a day, not as maybe lesson, but that we can organize and suggest and give a chance to all the children. And also, of course, the idea is that it will last for our lifespan. And the thing is that we cannot always be in the school, so what can we do when we are not in the school in another context, outdoor and so on. The 8, I will not take all of them, of course not. We have 28, if I don't miss it. So I think this part for me, the health education concept like personal and social well-being, health promotion, and healthy lifestyle. The idea is that we have responsible young people who are able to take care of this themselves, but they have to learn how to do it, and I think we have to give them the chance to do and to experiment those activities. The 11th, this is the third time. This is always a big discussion. We saw with Martin as well. Of course, we would like to have an hour of physical education every day, but of course quality physical education, not just to say that we have one more. I think this is of course not, but if we count how many hours do we have as physical education during the compulsory school time, this is about 1,000 hours. So we should, now, if we had 3 hours every week during the compulsory time, so almost 4, 5 years old to 16, this is a mean. So we have about 1,000 hours of physical education. In 1,000 hours, we should be able to teach something. We should have learning outcomes. I think we are responsible for this. And we can also ask for this possibility. And I think show that we are a big contribution to this health and physical activity. I'm finished. Yeah. So if we go back to the main finding from during this time, I will not do everything again, but I will just take one thing. This is the intervention is more than when it goes really on physical activity. Then increasing the physical activity when we have support from the school, from the parents. The physical activity intensity is higher when it is intervention, but when we check after 1 year is still higher, but when we check after 2 or 3 hours, 3 years, not anymore. So it means that we have to have those programs for a long term, not only for 1 year. And then the feedback can be interesting to help. So the tools for the school, I will not go through everything, but I wanted to show one example, because I told you before the assessment is important. Of course, the learning outcomes, this is one of the assessment, but also if you have an institution like a school, one interesting tools for me is the self-assessment. So if you have a school, you could just answer those questions. I will not go through all the questions, but the question is just, in our school, the following myths concern PA are done. And then there are some questions about general physical activity, about the team. Do we have a team? Who is doing what? Do we really are concerned about this, or we only speak about it? And then about the environment as well, with different projects, also from the school to back home and so on. Health and non-physical activity. Would like to implement, if you take what we have learned from the field till now, some suggestions based on PA. A very supporting environment, the school, the parents, long-run project. Objective fields are getting responsible for what they are doing, monitoring.
I was just told I gotta speed a bit up, so I'm going to into work life concerning physically beneficial courses. Yes. Our experience is also nice in health places, and we do that for roughly 200,000, where we try to improve physical activity. We try to initiate some health initiatives and helping the management, supporting and healthy lifestyle. But back to the slide, physical activity at the workplace as a health promoting tool. It's a well-known practice that companies implement health promoting initiatives, and it's also a well-documented course that physical activity has a promoting effect, but is it profitable is my question here. Looking at a recent research by a man called Justus Bendix, a recent study he conducted regarding physical activity at the workplace shows some effects through a significant improvement. Way back. Yep. And the study is with 9 different companies, and they were offering some different solution to initiate some physical activity at the workplace. First of all, they should conduct 1 hour of high intensity exercise training within the working hours, and also have to recommended 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity outside in the leisure time. Other findings was that after a year, the physical condition improved with 7% in general. There's also an improvement to health overall in 11.5%. There's an improvement to the work rate of 5%, increase in productivity by 7.5%, and a reduction in short-term absence by 49%. Those factors could be equivalent contributing to a positive bottom line. That's why we say it's a profitable doing those business. So all in those factors combined, it contributed to a more positive bottom line. Looking further deeper in the research, we saw that there are some crucial and facilitating factors, and the most important ones was well-educated health ambassadors at the company in coalition with the management. Those 2 findings support very well our own experience from Danish Federation for Company Sports, where we have been working for many years facilitating and initiating, educating a lot of health ambassadors. And we all, in general terms, found similar findings. I try to summarize some of our findings, compare it to the study's findings. But overall, we can say with a strategical conducted effort from the beginning is kind of a keystone to it all. When you're looking at those change management elements, such as is the organization flexible, is it ready for development, is it suitable for transformation, is a very, very important factor. Looking at a more strategic health management point of view, the integration of workplace health promotion, or the health promotion at the workplace, turning that into the corporate strategy and culture is a very important factor as well. Overall, we could summarize our findings in 8 elements, 8 promoting elements. The first 2 ones highlighted is the same as the research study. We found that a committed management who show the way or lead the way is the most important factor. Thereafter, we can find that well-trained ambassadors, health ambassadors, play an important role. Goal setting and ambition, responsibility from the employees, a persistent strategy, supporting nurturing motivation. We've got the long-term investment planned, like what are our researchers, what do we have with time, what is our manpower, and a change of culture and the willingness to change old way of looking at things. But last but not least, implementing the physical activity with a climate where human positivity and no accusing fingers is the topic also have positive support. A bit more about the committed management, which we also find is whether you physically or non-physically show the way by being a leader on the management. It's a way of legalize participating in the physical activity at the workplace throughout the whole organization. Promoting by taking the shirt on, or another example I could tell from a company, it's the management took selfies while they're playing ping pong to legalize to employees that it's okay to participate or conduct different activities during work time. But as well also some other video documentation where they enhanced for competitive management through production or something. As well, the management enhanced some of the health ambassadors' recent initiatives by doing some wild spread of she's the one who walked the most steps today, or he's the guy who ate less candy, or something like that. Some viral threat internally. But management or top management is one part. For many companies, it's the most vital part is the middle managers, which often is the actual representatives of the management. They are the important factor to close the gaps between an organization. Yeah, the health ambassadors, some important findings from our experience is they're the mainstay to achieve a sustainable health culture. It's the tangible and some would say easy approach for a company to start a solution to improve health or by physical activity or other. The thing about selecting or spotting the right ambassador is always a good question, but rather looking into who are interested and who are motivated instead of looking who are competent or who's the best at playing soccer or running might be a better solution to do that. Interest beats how many goals you score in this matter. Yep, and finally they are of course the facilitators for a more snowball, in general, snowball effect for implementing a health promoting atmosphere at the company. And an important factor is that they undergo an ongoing support from the management and also undergo some education and training in how to motivate their colleagues and how to initiate new motivational tactics as well. I would like to present an example with a company we've been working more or less with for the last 6 years. It's one of the most successful companies initiating or implementing physical activity in the workplace in Denmark. It's called ICSSPE, and they have for 6 years in a row now have success with some physical activity that just make it more impressive for staying so long and being persistent. Just so you know, the fact they got 30 minutes of physical activity each day in the working hours, where they close, all production close everything, and all the employees can choose to walk or to run or to play a soccer match or to do something different. The results, the sickness absence is under 2%, and they got together the highest revenues in that period. So actually, if you look at it from an economic perspective, they earned from the effort. And like the manager said to me last day, 7.5 hours with reserve of energy is better than 8 hours with lack of energy. And that's kind of suiting, I guess. But let's look into one of the main, some of the main keys for the success. First of all, it's a progressive and a participating management who's in front of this company. And they, from the start on, made a baseline intervention to say what are our needs, what do we want, a clear goal setting, and created a firm fundament by implementing every member of the organization, from top management to the factory, out in the factory and so on. But also they have successfully implemented a broad variety of activities, thereby looking at every matter to inspire or to nudge some of the colleagues to exercise. And not only looking into the more fitness or the more other fitness-oriented initiatives, which are the most common ones for the companies to implement. But it's usually also those kind of activities which some of the top percentage who already do physical activity in spare time and leisure time as well, and so it's not kind of the target group they want to hit. Yes. 6 years in a row, how should they continue their success? Should there be a progression? How do you ensure a healthy involvement in a success? Our experience is that within proactive thinking, meaning that you kind of constantly testing and securing new tendencies and involvement from both the very active one and the less active ones at the workplace has continued, can continue a healthy progression. But also as well, referring to the company before, the manager told me, I found my start 11. I don't want to change my winning team. We got the right kind of activities for my kind of colleague, for my colleagues right now. So it creates this safe pattern and this safe settings for them right now. So it can also turn into interference if you constantly initiate or insert a lot of new activities and take away some of the darlings from the colleagues. Does perks get out of hand, or does the perk get out of hand? Do more, want more. It's now in this occasion it was 30 minutes of activity. Would it be 1 hour less next year, or 2 hours, 2 years? But the answer is kind of no. it's kind of shaping a natural itself where the company and employees suit them as well. I don't think anybody is interested in doing 2 hours of physical activity at the workplace. Some few people may, but not in general. They have to work a lot from home and so on. But also another way to progress is to keeping accepting a resistance or reluctance in participating in physical activity at the workplace. It's important to keeping a more processual mindset and accepting it as a small step towards a longer determined goal, and not everything can be mattered in a short time and period. But also looking at it like it's a point of view, like it's a popcorn bag. Some corns immediately pop, and some corns eventually pop, and some corns never pop. And looking at that angle and focusing your energy and strength on the ones who are ready to eventually would pop, could be a strategic measure to do, because the ones who never pop, you just waste energy on them, and they kind of ruin it for everybody else. So, but looking at it into that point of view could be a strategic tool. Yes, implementing physical activity of the workplace is a team effort. You gotta support with your benefits and your strengths, and together you can find a solution for it. That's all. Thank you.
Incredibly heavy piece of plastic. And I'll put my wafer-thin titanium Mac. What was this? Okay, nearly there. Congratulations. This is like a special forces training effort with 7 presentations, but we do appreciate you sitting through. This should be relatively brief, as far as I'm capable of such a thing. I started out, my remit was to talk about practical steps or something, and because now I've given up any pretense of being an academic and I now sell my soul to any private company willing to pay, I largely deal with things with numbers. So, you know, if you want to get a good draw on your blog or something, give it a number. So intuitively, without thinking about it at all, I said 10 steps to reversing the physical inactivity epidemic. 2 problems with that. One, I'm not entirely sure it is an epidemic. I think there clearly is a problem, as we've heard from some of the speakers. The Lancet medical journal even used the phrase pandemic to describe inactivity. The other problem with having 10 is that almost invariably you run out of ideas after 9. So actually last night I did go to bed thinking, right, okay, I'll sleep on it and then number 10 will come up. Think about it. And I was saying to Martin when he came up, you know, I can only think of 9. Why did I say the number 10? Nonetheless, I have thought of 10, and you're going to find out all about them. So, yes, I'm Richard Bailey. I used to be a professor at the University of Birmingham in the UK. despite what Loughborough University says, Birmingham was the #1 sports university in the UK for research. We always, every conference, have to have a dig at one of the other universities. Now, I'm now based in the world's sexiest city, Berlin. That's a fact. Well, it's a fact that a survey came up with it being the sexiest city in the world. My office actually, to his suffering, is actually, I share an office with Martin in the Olympic Stadium. So, one of the things I was thinking about was initially comparing my life in the UK and in London with Berlin, and little things like the fact that I can cycle on the roads in Berlin without being hospitalised. I thought was one of the simple changes and so on. But then I thought, I'm a philosopher by background, so I want to carry out an experiment which is called the veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance is when you leave all the prejudice and your assumptions and your gender and your sexuality and your age behind and say, what does the evidence show? Because one of the problems we have with sport and physical activity is mythology. I mean, we actually heard it a lot yesterday when people were talking about the origin of the Olympic Games and de Coubertin's vision and all this. Now, okay, that is true. There was a man called de Coubertin, and he did produce this kind of charter for the Olympic movement. But the actual wider story is almost, I'm sure you've heard, is that de Coubertin was worried about the kind of the manliness of French youth. And don't forget, de Coubertin lived in a time before women had been born, okay, had been invented. So he worried about the manliness of French youth, and he heard about the public schools of England having this competitive school ethos that built character. There was muscular Christianity, and he went around the independent schools of England, and he got inspired by the English model of schools. It's just simply not true. I mean, it's simply a myth. The situation was, by the time de Coubertin went around the public schools of Eton, none of them taught schools at sport in the way that he said. His hero was Dr. Arnold, Matthew Arnold of rugby, the school that is supposed to be inventing the sport of rugby. That's a myth as well. It's got nothing to do with rugby school. But Matthew Arnold, if you're like me and a rather sad, lonely individual that reads the complete works and letters of Matthew Arnold, you'll realise Matthew Arnold hated sport. He would have none of it in the school. The only reason that there was any sport at rugby school or any of the independent schools at the time was because the boys wanted to play sport in their free time out of the supervision of the teachers. So this kind of Olympic mythology about there are these schools with this vision of developing leaders for the future is simply not true. But it's a comfortable myth. And then there are uncomfortable myths, and that's where philosophy and science becomes quite useful, I think, by saying on the second hand, so back to front, where's the evidence? And then in the first hand to say, what are the questions we should be asking anyway? The veil of ignorance is a philosophical tool where you basically, as I say, go through and you forget everything you know about you and your upbringing, and all you have available to you is information. So you would say, knowing what we know from science about the world, about the way that people interact, about medicine and about social development and psychosocial development, what should we do to deal with this problem? So by going through the veil of ignorance, we're leaving behind the traditional answers. We're leaving behind the strategies that some work, some don't work. And most importantly, we're leaving behind so-called common sense. Common sense, in my opinion, is a phrase that stupid people use to hide their ignorance. It's common sense we have to behave in this way. Common sense very rarely relates to science or the way that the natural world operates. Common sense says, if you want to develop a champion in sport, start them early and drill them through the system. Common sense is wrong. It's simply mistaken. Aside from any ethical concerns, it's wrong. Common sense says, if you exercise at a certain level of intensity and it has this health benefit, if you exercise at double the intensity, it'll have double the benefit. That's wrong. That's simply mistaken. So let's go through the veil of ignorance and find ourselves confronting the problem of inactivity and simply looking at the evidence. Now, this is a picture of some deck chairs. Okay, I'm coming here saying, why are you showing us a picture of some deck chairs? This is a physical activity. These are deck chairs on the Titanic. Okay, you may have heard the English phrase, changing deck chairs on the Titanic. What it means is the Titanic, the great ship that went from the UK to New York, unsinkable, and it's sunk. The phrase switching or changing deck chairs on the Titanic means if the ship is sinking, don't worry about trivial things like where your chair is. And what I'm going to suggest, or I'm suggesting now, is if physical inactivity is the problem that people like myself and others say it is, actually what we're doing in policy terms is a little bit like changing deck chairs on the Titanic. We're just fiddling. We're fiddling with trivialities. Sometimes it's kind of for personal reasons. Most of the people that make policy decisions are kind of like our age. But the problem is, it's too late by the time it gets to our age. I hate to say it, break it to you, but it is. It's too late. If you look at the evidence, the simple truth is that we have a window of opportunity to intervene in the promotion of physical activity, and that is for the first 10 years of life. If we do not rigorously, thoroughly, comprehensively introduce children not just to the experience of being physically active, yes, they are of course physically active anyway if you've ever seen a child, but the experience of physical activity in a formalised way, but also the skills of physical activity. It's not in developmental terms that they're never going to be physically active, that's not true, but the simple trajectory of human development means that if we don't develop these skills and motivations during the first 10 years of life, they probably will be developmentally disabled for the rest of their life. If you do not develop the movement skills, the running, jumping, twisting, turning, stopping, starting, catching, and so on, during the first 10 years of life, the likelihood of you developing it for the rest of your life is significantly limiting. Significantly limiting. If you don't develop these skills during your school years, the likelihood is almost non-existent. In other words, if we don't develop in children a portfolio of movement skills, and they enter adult life, and then in adult life, with all the wisdom that we all have among us, we say, I know, I'm going to go back and start to play sport. You can't. You can't. Because you can't even participate in the sessions, because you haven't got the movement competence to participate in the sessions. So my suggestion to you is that the first 10 years of life are the window of opportunity that we have to capture. Everything else is shifting chairs on the Titanic. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I love this type of stuff. I don't get out much. So, just look at a few things first of all. The first 10 years lay the foundation for lifelong physical activity. If you don't develop the movement skills, for example, if you want to be a football is just a combination of running, stopping, changing direction, kicking, and so on. All of these fundamental skills are necessary for you to develop the wider skill. Okay? So physical activity, when we talk about physical activity, I probably shouldn't speak to my colleagues, when I talk about physical activity, I don't just mean running about. I'm talking about running about and learning a vocabulary of movement. This is the mistake that some people make. I was in a school in America where they'd heard, you know, one hour physical activity a day, so for 1 hour a day the children marched. No. I mean, unless you're sort of training people for Iraq, where march, it would even be useful in that context, I don't know. No, physical activity during childhood without movement skill acquisition is pointless. And actually it's worse than pointless. Do nothing rather than that. Because boredom plus pointless physical activity means they've gone. Okay? I mean, you might as well do, well, the type of thing that girls experience on a daily basis in many physical education lessons. It is worse than nothing. So the first 10 years are important. Parents we know are key promoters of physical activity during the early years, not later on. It's really interesting how the evidence is fairly clear that friendship groups and peers, other children or people the same age, once the children move beyond about 8 years of age, become more and more dominant. yet they're completely invisible in policy terms. And nobody would seriously suggest that parents are a determinant of children's behaviour. If you've ever been in an airport lounge among parents with children, you'll know that parents' behaviour of sitting down quietly is rarely copied by their young children, who predominantly run around like a mad thing screaming at the top of their voice. But parents nonetheless influence that behaviour. Survey I did with Unilever, sold my soul, survey I did for Unilever found that 70% of parents did not feel confident enough to play sport with their children after they moved through the early years, so that's 5 or 6 years of age. 70% of children, that was a European-wide survey, they did not feel confident enough to play sport with their children. So the main socialiser, parents, do not feel able to play sport with their children. So, final one here. And generally speaking, one thing that comes across time and time again is that upper socioeconomic groups generally benefit most from physical activity opportunities. It varies from places like Germany that have a very high participation in sports clubs, subsidised sports clubs, relatively cheap or even free, I believe, and so on, to the UK, where unless you're the Marquis of Queensberry, you're not even let in a tennis club. So, well, yes, I mean, UK is an alarming, obviously I am English. If you're wondering, by the way, we've heard all lots of accents. This is the way English is supposed to be spoken. Just in case you're wondering. The way Marvin spoke, that's kind of a version that we allow to, yes, this is the way it's supposed to be. So anyway, what was I saying? Yes, 70% of athletes in the Olympic squad for the 2012 Olympics and the Great Britain team came from independent schools. 7% of children in the UK go to independent schools. That's not a talent identification strategy. That's a social prestige and privilege identification strategy. 70% from a 7% population. It doesn't make, but also from the point of view of talent, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, how many potentially talented young people do not make any sport purely because their parents haven't got the money? Anyway, I digress. I suppose it's not really digressing. So my recommendations are, 1, half of all government investment in physical activity promotion should be in the first 10 years. If it's generally the case that this is the key phase of physical activity promotion, at least 50% of all money should go in the first 10 years. I'm not denying the importance of later development. I was involved in the beginning of the highly successful programme that Sport England run on promotion of women's physical activity. The point is, there wouldn't be a problem with women's physical activity if we sorted out the problem to start with. This is a problem of our creation. As Maja said, it's a cultural problem. I should be clear, I'm not saying this solves the problem. What I'm saying is, at least it starts the situation on a reasonable, secure footing. Because one of the reasons that girls are less physically active than boys is because they have relatively less developed movement skills. The reason that girls have relatively less movement skills is they have significantly less movement opportunities than boys. This is a problem relatively easily solved, but it has to be developed at the systemic level. Next one. All children and their parents should have free access to local government sports and activity facilities. If it's really true that parents are key within socialisation in sport, then we cannot offer the barrier of finance for them to participate. Marvin's already given the figures for the cost of physical activity. The cost of making, in the UK and Germany and a couple of other countries that we've calculated, making all of these facilities free at the point of access is a fraction of the health costs, a fraction. And also, in light of what I said about confidence and competence, parental education for physical activity promotion should be freely available to parents of all children during the first 10 years of life. What about the school? You've heard a lot about the school, so I won't spend too long. As Martin said, it is the only place where you can capture all children. So I mentioned talent development. If talent development isn't included in schools, it's a pointless talent development because that is the only place where the talent is. That's the only place where all of the talent is. But in terms of physical activity, if we're genuinely trying to introduce physical activity for lifelong learning, unfortunately there is one place that will guarantee access to young people, all young people, and it's the school. After-school clubs, on average, attract about 50% of the school population. Out-of-school clubs, it varies between 75% and 10%, depending on what country you're looking at. Schools, if you can get them in the door, you've got 100%. We know that most primary school children around the world are not taught by qualified teachers. Most primary school children in Europe are not taught by primary school teachers. Most primary school teachers do not feel comfortable teaching physical education. In the same survey where we asked parents, and they revealed that 70% of them did not feel confident teaching sporting activities, about 70% of teachers gave the same response. So it's nobody's job then. That's the problem. It's nobody's job. In some countries, it's a very, very, very small number of countries, there are primary school specialists teaching in primary schools. In the vast majority of countries, they're generalists teaching with any varying degrees. In the UK, 8 hours total training for generalists to teach physical education. Basically, that's just enough to make you scared of children falling on their head in gymnastics, but nothing else. So, primary school lessons should be only taught by specialist teachers and coaches. That's actually more radical than that sounds, because the current debate in physical education is, or one of the debates is whether you let coaches teach children. I'll put my hand on my heart, yes, I think we should. I don't care about where the person comes from. If they're qualified, they should be doing it. In the UK, or England at the moment, the Premier League is funding every single child in England to be taught by a Premier League football coach who is senior level coach or above. I can't think of any possible reason why that's not a good thing. They don't teach football, they teach them physical education, they train in physical education. This is an issue around Europe and around the world. In some countries in Europe, coaches are simply normal parts of the educational landscape. It seems to me the most important aspect is that every child experiences a high quality education. Could be the butcher for all I care, as long as they've got the qualifications and expertise. Funds should be redirected from secondary schools. Most primary school children are not taught by specialist teachers. Many primary school teachers around the world are not taught at all, anything, which is shocking. That's from the ICSSPE's World Survey of Physical Education. Most countries have their specialist teachers in secondary schools. Okay? Shift the funding. Shift the funding from secondary schools to primary schools. Shift the specialism. If somebody... I'm not suggesting we stop secondary school physical education, but in my opinion, if it's a choice between only primary and only secondary, only primary. Primary school physical education should be concerned with activity, participation, and the development of movement skills, not competitive sports. We've heard about that before. I think competitive sports are great, but we do know that they're associated with a minority of young people, and those children who drop out of sport, the number one reason in Europe for dropping out is an overemphasis on competitive sport. If nothing else, that should give us caution to say, let's be careful with what we do in physical education. This is the campaign from Sport England. It's remarkable, partly because it was successful. It actually has significantly increased girls' physical activity. I kick balls, deal with it. In almost every study, girls are less active than boys. We've heard this before, so I won't repeat Maja's presentation. Negative social judgment, lack of positive role models, inappropriate activities offered, and an overemphasis on competition. So my proposal 6 is girls' physical activity should be a key policy priority, and funding should be weighted towards supporting girls' physical activity. In other words, I'm suggesting that girls receive more funding than boys. Malcolm X, the great American black Muslim leader, said, if you educate a man, you change an individual. If you educate a woman, you change society. If we can change the physical activity of girls, all the evidence shows we will change the physical activity of the world. we will change the physical activity wholesale. So I think we have to take it on the chin. Girls' physical activity should be the priority. This is another proposal. Elite female competitive sport should be given equal time in all state-run and state-licensed media channels. The justification given by media channels around the world for not showing women's sport is pitifully weak, which is that there's no market for it. Which is a bit like saying nobody buys cornflakes when we don't put cornflakes on the shelf. It doesn't have to be on equally prestigious channels, doesn't have to be equally dominant television or media channels, but it should be receiving equal weighting if we're going to be creating a culture of aspiration and normality for girls' physical activity. We know that children as young as 3 are currently on intensive adult-like training programs. We also know that once somebody's been identified as talented, the average figure is 0.01% who make it through the talent program. I would say the association with damage to education means that's profoundly immoral. Taking children on a route that prohibits their education, potentially is unhealthy, and they're almost certain to fail, is immoral. So talent spotting should be banned during the early years and only allowed with conditions in later childhood. It's not good for children. There is no such thing as an early specialisation sport. This is an adult invention. Children shouldn't be exposed to it. And the UN should develop an annual observatory of physical activity and physical fitness levels. We do not know how fit and active children are. If you do a survey, an international survey of physical activity levels, you will find that the youngest reliable data is for 15-year-olds. In light of what I said about physical activity being a foundation, that's a problem. Finally, most talent development is based on the pyramid model. The pyramid model, which is shown to you there, is based on exclusion and failure, and it's also based on the dodgy assumption that you can tell the future. You cannot tell the future. What we can tell is that relatively wealthy, relatively old, relatively mature children make it through the system, and that is not a talent model. So we need to develop multiple pathways that focus on keeping children playing for as long as possible and doing everything possible to stop them falling out of the system. So instead of shifting chairs on the Titanic, what we should be trying to do is basing our judgments on the available evidence and the values associated with mass participation, sport for all, and positive physical activity experiences. I'll stop talking there. Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes, haven't we? One. Sorry, that's my fault. Yeah, do you have any questions? Unfortunately, we're very short time because Marvin went on too long. Do you have any questions? That wasn't a beg for no questions, but if you do, it'd be great. Otherwise, you could see us. We're all going to be around later on, aren't we? Today and at the conference dinner. Well, we'll call it a day then. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming, and see you soon.
And we will start the next session, but some of the other sessions, if you go to other parallel sessions than the development forum, then you should go now, because they start now, the other sessions. I'm sorry about that. And we will start in here in 10 minutes, 5 minutes to 12.
Det var fint weekend. Okay. Yes.
Well, you have.
Weekend?